Whenever you have a political primary field that is as crowded as the one that we see in the Democratic Party right now, what happens is that most of the candidates fail to really get off the ground or even make enough of an impact that people remember that they were even in the race. However, Andrew Yang has an opportunity both to make a major mark on the race and possibly even to win. So, of all the people I've talked about, I actually think he might be the most interesting. So let's talk about Yang, his policies, and also the state of his campaign as it stands right now in April of 2019. First of all, there's something that I have to get off my chest that is effectively a public service announcement. Right now, the establishment Democrats are doing everything in their power to smear progressives as being racist. This is a tactic that they have been using heavily since 2016, where they tried the same thing against Bernie Sanders. But at least Bernie is white. I mean, technically he's Jewish, but in America the line is a little bit blurry. Right now, the establishment is trying to smear as white nationalists two people who are not even white. One of them being Tulsi Gabbard, the other one being Andrew Yang, who is an Asian man. And the reason why they're being smeared in this way is because they appeal to some people who are on the right. And they make it out as if because these people also hold racist views that their support for Yang and Tulsi must imply that Yang and Tulsi are pandering to right-wing white nationalism. What a lot of the people making the smears refuse to recognize, or perhaps simply don't understand, is that the reason why the people who come from the alt-right to back a Tulsi or a Yang do so for other reasons. Some of them are not economically right-wing, for instance. So the idea, of course, that you are in line with everyone who supports you is ridiculous when you look at national elections where people attract support from a broad segment of the population, and no matter who the candidate is, they will have some people supporting them who are objectionable in some way. The smear is ridiculous, and it really does show exactly how intellectually and morally bankrupt the Democratic establishment has become. However, one thing that I think we can take solace in is that while the basic claim of identity politics has really taken off within the Democratic Party, i.e. the ideas of representation and racial justice, people actually have principles to enforce how identity politics would work. So for instance, I think most people can see through the obvious lies that are being perpetrated by mainstream columnists to try to smear Tulsi and Yang as white nationalists, or at least enough people can see through it that it will not be deadly for them. I'd also like to go ahead and throw out there the idea that if Yang were an establishment Democrat, if he were just another milquetoast candidate, if he were, say, the Asian Obama, so he could supplement the gay Obama, the Dollar General Obama, the female Obama, and whatever Beto O'Rourke is, and then Julian Castro, if he were in that camp, he would not be getting smeared, and in fact, he'd be getting puff piece after puff piece after puff piece. He'd get a CNN town hall, and he would have a Chris Cillizza segment where he's just talking about what a fantastic candidate Yang is and how historical he is. To return to the man of the hour, let's look at Andrew Yang's early life and education. Yang was born on January 13, 1975 in Schenectady, New York. His parents were first-generation Americans. They immigrated from Taiwan, and then they met in graduate school at UC Berkeley. Yang's father has a PhD in physics. He worked as a research scientist, and over the course of his career, he registered 89 patents. I'm not sure exactly how many patents the normal research scientist is able to pull off, but 89 sounds like it is rather on the extremely high side. Yang's mother has a master's in statistics, and later in her career, she became an artist. As for Andrew himself, he attended Brown University, where he earned an undergraduate degree in economics, and then he attended Columbia Law School. So he is also very academically accomplished. And when you think about the combination of his educational background with his parents' educational background, it should come as no surprise that Many people that I've talked to are really impressed by him because he sounds exactly like an academic. Most of my friends are academics, so that's probably why I'm having that experience. Maybe it's different for other people. I know that his support tends to be from a fairly wide variety of people in terms of their educational backgrounds. Anyhow, though, this is something I think that sets him apart from the field because very few other candidates could go into an academic conference and just blend right in. Also, as somebody once joked somewhere on the internet, Yang is one of the few people in politics who could reference one of his books or reference a time when he's read a book. Yang's career has been entirely in the private sector. When he first graduated from Columbia Law School, he became a corporate lawyer in New York. He served in that capacity for about a year. So to his credit, he did get out of that racket. In 2000, he launched StarGiving.com, which is a celebrity-driven philanthropic organization. However, he was not able to raise enough capital to keep it going, and the organization folded in 2001. At that time, he did not know Barack Obama like he does now. The reason I make that joke is because the right used to say that Obama is basically the biggest celebrity in the world and that the Democrats only care about celebrity. And then, of course, they nominated Trump. But, hey, who's keeping score? Later on, Yang joined a healthcare software company called MMF Systems Incorporated, and he was able to join as a vice president, and he stayed with that company until 2005. By 2005, Yang was starting to get involved in his better-known ventures, the first of which was Manhattan Prep. He joined his friend Zeke Vanderhook, who had founded a small test prep company called Manhattan Prep, and in 2006, Yang actually became the CEO of the company. As the CEO, Yang focused mostly on GMAT test preparation, and he expanded the company from having 5 offices to 69. Later on, Kaplan acquired Manhattan Prep in 2009, and Yang himself stayed on as president of Manhattan Prep until early 2012 when he left for other ventures. Now, personally, I see this as a minor mark against Andrew Yang because I think that a lot of the standardized test prep industry is something of a racket, and that the students who are able to get test prep help are unfairly advantaged over their poorer counterparts. So I'm not a fan of this entire industry, and also the fact that he was involved in that healthcare software company earlier is a little bit of a red flag for me, although a minor one. But again, he has been successful, and there's something to be said for that. By far the best known of Andrew Yang's business ventures is his nonprofit Venture for America. Starting in 2011, when he was about to leave Kaplan, Yang started this organization as a nonprofit fellowship which would send top graduates to work in cities other than New York for 2 years. In 2014, the program was up to 106 fellows, and by 2017, there were over 20 cities that were featured. Mostly these are mid-sized cities between the coast, however there are other cities which are pretty large, such as Philadelphia. In March of 2017, Yang officially left Venture for America so that he could focus more heavily on his presidential run. This is something that will be a major asset for Andrew Yang. First of all, by getting on good terms with all the people he recruited for this project, he'll have lots of business leaders throughout the country who can raise money for him and sort of campaign for him. And I think that might account for some of his fundraising numbers that we've already seen. Another thing that this does is it shows that Yang has an understanding of America and the American economy, which goes beyond the New York-LA dichotomy that many Democrats have sort of fallen into. A lot of Democrats, especially of the Bill Maher variety, see America as divided between two coasts with just a bunch of garbage in the middle. And Yang is someone who has been to places like, say, Columbus, Ohio, or St. Louis, Missouri, or wherever. So he has a better feel for the country as a whole. And I think that's an important asset both as a candidate and as someone who might potentially govern as president. So again, this will be something that he will be able to point to, and it will be something that will appeal to most voters, and that includes voters of pretty much every political stripe. Like everyone who's running for president, Andrew Yang has written the obligatory book. However, he has completely subverted expectations by writing a book that's actually about issues rather than about his personal journey. And in fact, he wrote a book before he ever decided to run for president. In 2014, Andrew Yang wrote the book Smart People Should Build Things: How to Restore Our Culture of Achievement, Build a Path for Entrepreneurs, and Create New Jobs in America. So this was basically a book that went along with his Venture for America project, and which kind of expressed his philosophical underpinning for that undertaking. His sort of more presidential campaign book is The War on Normal People: The Truth About America's Disappearing Jobs and Why Universal Basic Income is Our Future. And that was published in 2018 after he had already announced his intention to run for president. So between these two books, you can get a fairly good feel of what Andrew Yang stands for. And if you have the opportunity, both of these books are worth checking out if you are interested in learning more about Andrew Yang, especially when it comes to how he envisions UBI, which of course is his major thing. Yang is a relatively private person when compared with many of the top candidates and politicians in America. He lives in New York with his wife Evelyn and their two sons, and he is a practicing Christian, but he doesn't rub his faith in everyone's face. So between those two things, the fact that he doesn't really have any drama or any known skeletons in his closet, and because he is well within the mainstream when it comes to religion, there's nothing that he could really be smeared for. I think that this will be an asset, especially in a field where people will be looking for that one weird thing about a candidate that they can use as an excuse to dismiss them. To give one example, John Hickenlooper famously watched a porn with his mom, and after hearing that, when you're in such a crowded field, I think most people will just hear that one fact and then throw Hickenlooper out the window. And I can't blame them. I think there are plenty of other reasons for disliking Hickenlooper, but we'll get to that when I talk about his candidacy, such as it is. In 2012, Yang, for the first time, met with Barack Obama, and he was recognized as what Obama called a champion of change. I suppose he also was not given the title Champion of Hope because Obama didn't create that. In 2015, he was also recognized by Obama again, this time being named as one of several people who became what is known as a PAGE, a Presidential Ambassador for Global Entrepreneurship. So even though by this point he really hadn't expressed any interest in politics, he was sort of being lured in by Obama. My guess would be that because Yang has a business background, Obama thought that Yang would be something of a neoliberal, and because he is a person of color, he would also be someone who could become another generic candidate who relies heavily on his ethnic background to disguise the fact that his ideas don't exist. But if that was Obama's calculation, I think that he may have miscalculated. In America, despite having 2 out of the last 3 presidents be businessmen who were horrible at both business and government, we as Americans still really cherish the idea that a business hero from the private sector will come along and teach us all to run government like a business and save us from the evils of the public sector. Yang is someone who can actually fulfill this cherished myth. Yang sees himself, and I think other people share his view, as a smart, successful businessman who has strong ethics. He has always paid his workers a living wage. He doesn't have any outstanding complaints against him, unlike many other prominent businessmen turned politicians. And I think in many ways you could see him as an idealized version of Trump, whereas Trump was a trust fund baby who was utterly incompetent at times, ran all kinds of different businesses into the ground, had to file for bankruptcy, didn't pay workers. Yang has never had any of that happen, and he has built his business by himself. He hasn't had to inherit it all from daddy. And as someone who has founded and run multiple companies, Yang can claim to have firsthand knowledge of the economy, especially when combined with his BA in economics. That being said, I do have to leave one caveat. Running any given company does not make you an expert on economics. Economics is a study of the economy as a whole, and if you just run a few companies, you've only really experienced what it takes to make a certain company in a certain market, in a certain industry, successful. And by successful, it means that you turn a profit and you keep the business going and growing. That is not the same as managing the economy as a whole, which is infinitely more complicated. However, not many people seem to understand that, so Yang will be able to say, hey, I ran a few businesses, and people will say, yes, you did, and yes, you are an economic expert. Another thing that Yang has going for him, which will enable him to play the business hero if he so chooses, and I think he will, is that he's intelligent, cool-headed, and he has an Obama-esque level of charisma. However, unlike Obama, who relied on platitudes and soaring rhetoric, Yang has more concrete ideas. So when you listen to Yang speak, you are never in doubt about what he wants to do and why. And I think that in an age where people are increasingly attracted to figures like Bernie Sanders, who are very specific and policy-oriented, this will also play into Yang's favor. So if he wants to come in as the guy who gets things done, the successful businessman who is a no bullshit, roll up your sleeves and get to work kind of guy, Yang's delivery style will work perfectly for that. So I think that this will be an asset for him a little bit in the primary, but a lot in the general election. Yang's campaign slogan is humanity first, and I think that that does a pretty good job of encapsulating what he stands for. However, if I may offer one quick critique, in general, I believe that if you are a Democrat running for president, you need to have a verb in your slogan. I have noticed that the candidates who lack a verb in their slogan tend to do rather poorly. Remember Hillary Clinton's Stronger Together. The thing is, people expect Democrats to run on a platform that is action-oriented. What will you do to help me? Republicans run on somewhat more nebulous and abstract concepts like freedom, honor, whatever it might be. So I think that Yang could probably do a little bit better in the slogan department, but I think he's on the right track. If we just look at sort of the principle that he stands for, the central idea behind Yang's entire campaign is that we need to reshape American capitalism to serve the needs of people rather than the needs of corporations. And I think that that is an incredibly powerful message. He opposes establishment identity politics, and he sees the suffering of white truckers as being every bit as legitimate as the suffering of people of color. And this goes along with his general focus on economics and on policies that address financial hardship. Now, partly this quote about the suffering of white truckers is what has brought on the unmitigated wrath of the people trying to label him as a white nationalist or as a panderer. But most of these people are either completely dishonest or simply stupid. I actually know some of the latter in my personal life who claim that, white people can't really suffer or be oppressed. However, if I dare any of them to go to West Virginia, find some toothless, unemployed person who has all kinds of health problems, diabetes, 5 ruptured discs in their back, and then tell them how they are the beneficiaries of white privilege, please do that. Please. And anyway, the thing is, Yang understands that you don't build a winning coalition talking about identity issues. You have to talk about economics, the one thing that unites working people across the country. So Yang learned well the lesson of 2016. So I applaud him for that. While Andrew Yang has, to his credit, talked about a fairly large variety of issues, and his website has something like 70 different policy positions, the main thing that he really focuses on is the issue of automation and how that will shape our future economy and what we need to do to prepare for it. So because mass automation has already begun and it will only continue to accelerate in the years ahead, Yang thinks the biggest issue that is going to emerge in the near future is mass unemployment that will be permanent. What we've already seen is that automation has driven wages down and that it has created job loss in a lot of formerly middle class sectors, but Yang thinks this is only going to accelerate and that now sort of the second tier jobs that people fell back to after losing their factory jobs, such as retail, are also going to go the way of the dinosaur. This is an issue where Yang is extraordinarily knowledgeable. He is definitely the automation guy. And he can cite countless examples of technologies that are nearing completion which will render many jobs obsolete. The other thing that Yang is able to tap into to some extent is the large number of people who are upset about outsourcing. Now, because outsourcing is a working class issue, establishment Democrats make it out to be a white issue, even though that is not true. Anyhow, though, Yang relates automation with outsourcing because he says that even with outsourcing in place, if it weren't for automation, a lot of the jobs that have been lost would still be here. So he thinks that automation has actually killed more jobs than outsourcing, and I'm not sure how much I agree with his argument on that, but I think that he does have a point. And certainly the issue of automation is one that is being massively ignored by nearly every other politician, including people who are generally very strong on labor issues, such as Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. And because Yang can speak so knowledgeably on this subject, I think that he might be able to eat into some of their support with unions and with people who are still upset about the lack of, say, factory work and things of that nature. So how does one curb the effects of automation and help to prevent mass unemployment, or at least offset its worst effects? Well, Andrew Yang says that we need to institute a universal basic income, and he is marketing this universal basic income as a freedom dividend. What this is every American over the age of 18 will receive $1,000 a month automatically to use as he or she sees fit. It will be paid for by a special tax on a lot of the tech industries who are the primary pushers and beneficiaries of automation. This is a form of bottom-up economics, a la the New Deal, and the idea here is that by putting money in people's pockets, you help to alleviate poverty and also provide a great boost to the economy because you will massively increase consumer spending and also entrepreneurial activities, creativity, leisure activities. Just down the line, it will have a big boosting impact on the economy that something like the stimulus package under Obama did not have, since it mostly just went to bankers. And when combined with Medicare for All, which Yang supports, this will provide a basic level of security for most people. Yang does an excellent job of arguing for the UBI. He has a ton of enthusiasm, all kinds of statistics, examples of other countries with similar programs. He likes to talk about Finland. He also talks about Alaska, where there is an oil dividend for all citizens of the state. And I think that between Yang's ability to make an argument and to set it up as well as he does, combined with people's lived experience where they can see these trends happening for themselves and where they can understand how much having this freedom dividend would impact their lives and the lives of especially their less fortunate relatives, I think that this will prove to be politically potent. And Yang is rightfully making this the centerpiece of his campaign. And although he really is not a single issue candidate, this more or less is the main thing he's running on, and it's the thing that he wants everyone to talk about. So I think that he really is a one-issue candidate, and it just happens to be a really, really good issue. That being said, I think that Yang might be a bit too optimistic about the impact of the UBI, and he seems to see it as a complete cure-all. Now, while I think the UBI would be a very important component of curing the problems that he lays out, I don't think that it will get us all the way to where we want to be. And before I go into my critiques of Yang's primary idea and of what he might be like as a president, I would first like to look at a critique by Michael Brooks, which was sort of what got me thinking about the potential downsides of Yang's candidacy and his ideas. So let's do a critique of Michael Brooks's critique. For those of you who don't know, Michael Brooks is a leftist YouTube commentator who often talks about Marx, and he makes a lot of YouTube videos both on his own channel and alongside of Sam Seder on the Majority Report. Brooks actually had a very scathing critique of Andrew Yang, some parts of which I think are legitimate and other parts which seem to me to be too harsh or to kind of miss the point. So let's sort of break this down step by step. First of all, he claims that Yang is more or less a foot soldier for what he calls Silicon Valley fascism, and that Yang is using the UBI as a bribe or bandage so that tech companies can continue to run amok and act as high-tech rubber barons. I think that that is a potential danger. However, I don't think that is what Andrew Yang is doing. There might be other people who would support his UBI or take advantage of it once it's in place to then justify not corralling the tech companies the way they need to be corralled. But this idea of Yang being a foot soldier for Silicon Valley fascism, I think, is unfair given Yang's actual record. He also labels Yang as a techno-libertarian who thinks that technology will solve all of our problems. I think that Yang does get more enthusiastic about technology than perhaps is warranted. However, I don't think that he is quite that naive. I've never gotten that impression from Yang, at least, and at this point I've watched hours of his interviews, and I just don't get that impression. Michael Brooks also says that the UBI could stifle class consciousness. So effectively, Brooks's critique boils down to we can't really have a true revolution in our thinking with the UBI because it would just dull our class consciousness by removing the immediate threats to our economic well-being and making people forget about their own poverty and stop striving to solve it. I don't really think that that's an actual threat, because once the UBI is instituted, or whether it's instituted or not, to speak more correctly, the trends Yang is talking about are real and will continue. So even with a UBI of $1,000 a month in place, people will still be struggling. Life is expensive. There are all kinds of expenses you have to incur to really live a modern life. If you think about everything from auto insurance, health insurance, phone bills, utility bills, rent, the $1,000 a month for most people will be eaten up in those kind of expenses. And of course, you have to consider things like landlords taking advantage of the fact that everybody has at least $1,000, so they're going to be hiking up rent even more. So I think that Brooks is a little bit wrong here, but I think that and it's because I think Brooks actually thinks that the UBI will be more effective than I think it will be. Brooks also says the UBI lacks imagination when it comes to restructuring the economy. I totally disagree. The UBI is an idea that has been around, and I think one of Brooks's reasons for opposing the idea is that it was proposed by Milton Friedman. Well, I'm not a big Milton Friedman fan, but he had a good idea on this. It is a solid way to redistribute income to make sure that we don't have dire poverty. And I don't really get what's so unimaginative about it when compared with other solutions from most of the other candidates that we see. I just don't see it. One of Brooks's critiques that I really don't understand is he criticizes Andrew Yang for viewing college in monetary terms, in terms of your earning potential and how much it costs to get through it and the debt, and not about your development as a human being. So as someone who's in the liberal arts, I mean, I view college as human development in many ways. However, when I'm looking for a political leader who sets the conditions under which people go to college, I don't really give a shit what this person thinks in their soul about how college will make you a better human or not. I'm only interested in, can you make this experience affordable and accessible? That's really the only goal of a politician. Politicians are not supposed to be some sort of moral exemplar or great philosopher. I just need them to be competent at their job and set the parameters under which everyone else can succeed in whatever they choose to do. Brooks also says that Yang assumes that Google and other companies have already won out, and that automation is just going to sweep through the whole economy. There's nothing we can do about it, and that the UBI is a way of getting a small recompense while accepting defeat. And I don't know what I think about that, honestly. I'm not sure if Brooks is right or not. But I thought that I would share this with you so that you can see what sort of prevented me from joining the Yang gang. Because at first, when I was looking into Andrew Yang, I was pretty enthusiastic. I wasn't quite ready to abandon Bernie Sanders, but I was thinking about it. And Brooks is the one who sort of shook my movement toward Yang. So anyway, now that I've had a few weeks to reflect on Andrew Yang and on Brooks's critique, I would like to offer more of my own, and then I will talk about Yang's viability as a candidate in both the primary and general. In light of the political betrayal that I experienced under Obama, I am very much interested in looking at the records of politicians to get an idea of what we can expect. And the fact that Yang is a political outsider is, to me, a massive turnoff. I don't know what he would vote for if he were, say, in Congress. I don't know how he would govern if he were put in a governor's mansion. So putting him in the White House seems to me to be something of a risk. Although that being said, I still prefer him over people whose records I know to be shit. All of Andrew Yang's economic thinking seems to me to be centered around tech and tech industry. That's sort of a problem just because I don't think that he necessarily has a view of the economy as a whole. I think that his view of the economy is centered around just the effects of automation and around the tech industry. And again, this critique is somewhat of a soft one in the sense that at least he has a view of the economy. I don't think most candidates have a meaningful comprehension of what the economy is or how it functions. That being said, I know a lot of people are acting as if Andrew Yang is the second coming of Jesus when it comes to understanding economics, and I'm just trying to push back on that gently. Just trying to curb the enthusiasm of people who are really overstating Andrew Yang's expertise. The other thing is that, as I mentioned, I am very skeptical of relatively unknown political actors who can potentially prove dangerous and become the receptacles of false hope, e.g. Barack Obama, who talked all about hope and change and talked a good game to unions and all that kind of stuff, and then attempted to pull off the grand bargain in 2011, which, had he succeeded, would have involved trading away the privatization of Social Security in exchange for nationalized legal gay marriage. A complete and utter betrayal of everything the Democrats have ever fought for. However, when I look at the idea of Andrew Yang as an inexperienced candidate going into the White House and then trying to actually enact all the things he wants to do, I just don't think he would be as effective as he might sound. He's got a lot of confidence, he's got charisma, he knows how to message, he's got a lot of things going for him. And although I'm not 100% sure, I think that he's sincere. And I think that he would try to do all the things that he's talking about. The problem is, I don't think he really understands how politics works. His belief in the ideal outcome of his policies is naive. So even if he gets these things passed, I don't think he understands that in the legislative process they might be watered down, or that there might be major political blowback to those ideas, which would result in losing a midterm and then having counter legislation come in to really undermine and weaken what he has done, the way that the Republicans have systematically gutted what little good Obamacare actually accomplished. I get the impression also that Yang does not fully understand how partisanship in Washington works, and I don't think he also understands the partisanship within the Democratic Party. I have no indication that he understands that the establishment is trying to murder him. I have no indication that he understands that Republicans will not climb on board with him just because he has a really good idea. So to me, these are dangerous marks of inexperience, and I'm skeptical. To build on my earlier point of being fearful of Andrew Yang's inexperience, I think point blank that Andrew Yang does not understand structural politics in America. Yang opposes busting up tech monopolies, stating that they function differently than traditional monopolies did 100 years ago, and that the economy is just different now than it was in the past. My response is citation needed. In what ways is it different? And in what ways those differences matter when we talk about trust busting? A lot of economists will just simply say that things are different. They are different, but you as an economist need to show exactly how they're different and how we react to those differences. And Yang on that question was incredibly weak, I thought, in that interview with Jimmy Dore. During the same interview, Yang did not acknowledge the real purpose of trust busting. He said that trust were bad because they limited consumer choice. But that's not really why trust busting was instituted. Trust busting exists to break up the massive amount of political power that is accrued by someone who controls an entire facet of the industry. And once you have highly concentrated political power in the hands of a few people because of massive wealth inequality, the system as a whole is rigged. This is what happened during the Gilded Age. It's what's happening now. It's effectively what destroyed the Roman Republic. This is something that Yang does not seem to grasp, which is odd. And I don't think it's because he's some sort of nefarious actor the way that Michael Brooks thinks. I think that he simply just doesn't understand the political implications. He does understand the social dangers of extreme income inequality. He talks well about the suffering of working people. He understands people have to pay bills, so he does a great job of relating to people on what you might call the social level. However, when it comes to the political level, i.e. the big fights that we engage in to deal with these social problems, I don't think that he quite gets it. I don't think that he gets that one of the major facets of income inequality that makes it such a danger is that it empowers such a small group of incredibly wealthy people at the expense of everyone else, and that is what exacerbates the suffering on the daily level for the vast majority of the people. So that for me is my primary critique of Andrew Yang, at least as his campaign stands right now. And I think that Yang's a smart guy, so there's a pretty good possibility that he will pick up on this sooner rather than later. For the most part, I'm not going to address issues that Andrew Yang raises outside of the UBI, simply because Yang wants to be known as the UBI guy, and most people who have reported on him have been more than willing to oblige, seeing that as his most important and interesting idea. The one that's gotten the second most attention is actually his opposition to circumcision, which, as he correctly observes, doesn't actually serve any real purpose. However, one idea that he has that I absolutely hate, and that by itself was reason enough for me to put him at the bottom of the progressive pile, is his idea about instituting a free speech ombudsman. The idea here, I've given a lengthy quote from his website on it, but I'll just summarize it in my own words. The idea is that he wants to create a news and information ombudsman who can fine egregious offenders, especially corporate offenders. And the idea will be to root out fake news and to punish foreign nationals who are trying to influence the American public. So effectively, Yang is buying into the Russiagate hysteria. The idea that Russians on Facebook with 5 memes, 4 of which are about kittens, can swing an American election. So the premise itself, unlike most of Yang's premises, is frankly a stupid one. I really like the way that Yang sets up problems and then outlines them and then shows solutions. However, in this case, it was the layout of the problem which really gave away how dumb the whole thing is. But the solution itself is worse than the problem that it seeks to address, even if you accept the problem as being legitimate, which I really don't. If we institute a free speech ombudsman, what will happen is that some establishment hack will get into the job and then label anyone who disagrees with the administration as being fake news. This will basically give teeth to people like the Hillary Clintons of the world to silence their critics from the left and label them as fake news and extremist, to sort of Alex Jonesify them, if you will. Once Republicans get back into office, and of course they eventually will, this could easily be used to try to, say, label atheism as hate speech or something along those lines. My point is that this is an idea that would be later used to empower some really terrible people. If you don't think that this is an obvious political football that will be abused horribly by future presidents, then you're really not thinking about this issue. If you are in the Yang Gang, I strongly recommend that you write to Andrew and urge him to drop this idea. This is a horrible idea. It has no merit, and if instituted, it would be incredibly dangerous. So let's kill this idea in the bud, please. After having spent the last few weeks thinking about Andrew Yang's candidacy and what he stands for, I find myself mired in ambivalence about the whole thing. That being said, when I think about his electoral viability, it's so strong and so obvious that I have to acknowledge the possibility that he will be both the nominee and the 46th president. And because of that, I would really like to sort of think through what is the best and worst case scenario for an Andrew Yang administration. In the best case, Yang is an open-minded, adaptable, dynamic problem solver who would implement structural fixes to our broken political system. Once in office, Yang would quickly wise up the political realities after Mitch McConnell and others try to screw him over, and then he would use his considerable talents and energy to surmount the opposition. He would be sort of a second FDR, or maybe what Obama was supposed to be. In the worst case, Yang would be so fixated on the UBI's curative powers and the unalterable reality of job loss and tech takeover that he would just continue to ignore the politics which condition the socioeconomic issues that he identifies. Yang will not learn from his mistakes, and he will continue to get chewed up by the Mitch McConnells of the world. So those would be the two ways that I'd see a Yang presidency going. I think that both scenarios are relatively plausible. However, of course, this is purely speculative, and as the Yang campaign progresses and as the field continues to shape up, I think that the parameters of possibilities will shift. However, I just wanted to sort of clue you all in as to where I see things going right now, potentially. Of all the 2020 Democrat videos that I have made and will make, this one is the most difficult simply because Andrew Yang is the most complex candidate. Yang is stronger than almost all of the other candidates in the field, despite his shortcomings. He has charisma, he has ideas, and he is resonating with a certain sector of the electorate in a way that most other candidates are not. However, his understanding of political reality and the political economy is insufficient for him to really become the transformational president that we so desperately need right now when we have a plethora of issues that are going completely unaddressed. Hopefully, Yang will be able to successfully mainstream the idea of the UBI. I think that that is the most plausible outcome of his candidacy. I don't think that he has the name recognition to topple the huge names in the field, at least with the time remaining to him in the primary race. But I do think he will succeed in getting the UBI into the public discourse. And that in itself is a major victory for the entire American public, I believe. And I think that Yang's vision of the freedom dividend will probably be a large part of our eventual adjustment to a post-industrial world. So even if Yang fails as a candidate, I think that he will end up doing positive good for the American political system just by pushing for the idea of the UBI. I also think that it's possible that he will end up being in the cabinet of the next president, or that he might come back and run for president later once his name recognition is higher, and he might just end up being an American president. I just don't think he'll end up being number 46, however, because it's a little too late for him to overcome the name recognition gap of someone like a Bernie Sanders, and I think that he just has a few too many holes in his resume at the moment to really skyrocket to the top and become the darling of the progressives and then sweep through the primary.